Welcome to the Power of Facebook Groups, How to Hack the Algorithm and Organize Your People. We are so excited that you're choosing to spend the next hour with us. Today we will be talking about a very specific case study at United for Respect around how we organized Toys R Us workers after you may have heard the bankruptcy that happened 2 years ago, and we used Facebook groups to organize folks in lots of exciting ways that you'll hear about. And just to begin, my name is Anetta. I use she, her pronouns. I am formerly the digital director at United for Respect, and I am now a senior strategy director at ThinkShout, and really excited to be co-presenting with Alia.
Hi, everybody. My name is Alia Sabharwal. I use she, her pronouns, and I am currently a senior organizer with United for Respect. And Anetta and I worked very closely together on the Toys R Us campaign. So I'm so glad to be here with all of you.
Amazing. All right, so we're going to jump in with some quick context. If you're just joining us, drop in who you are, who you're organizing with in the chat, and please use the Q&A function throughout the presentation. So Alia, I'm kicking it to you.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Anetta. So we're going to start with some background on the Toys R Us campaign before we get into the specifics of how we used Facebook groups. But just to give you all some background, Toys R Us, was bought over by 3 Wall Street firms back in 2005. They were bought over in what we call a leveraged buyout, which is essentially putting tons of debt into the company. Wall Street firms are using these leveraged buyouts to purchase all kinds of companies in retail and across, many different industries. The company was $5 billion in debt in 2017 and filed for bankruptcy. In 2018, by June, all stores in the United States were closed. As is standard, a lot of executives got multi-million bonuses, while over 30,000, it was closer to 33,000 employees were laid off without their severance policies, which were null and void once the company went bankrupt. So the context we were looking at is a large, sector of this, of the retail population sort of losing their jobs, losing their severance, health insurance, after many of them had spent decades on the job. So people out of work, and dealing with a bankrupt employer, and that was sort of the background in which we got involved. So you can move on to the next slide. So what is the online to offline pathway, right? It is the traditional pathway for all of you organizers out there. You reach out to folks, you engage, you activate, you lead, and you see the leadership potential of your people. With the online to offline pathway, we are still doing a lot of the same pieces, but we have an added component, which is the connection. And the online social media space is the space of connection. It is not the only place of connection. And we'll emphasize this throughout, that the online space does not fully absorb and replace in person, but it just becomes a complement to how you're doing your in-person organizing as well. And that you'll see throughout this presentation that we relied on in-person protests, actions, trainings, meetings as well, but that we utilize social media as yet another space in which to create community, another space in which to connect. And from that connection comes engaging people in the deeper issues, engaging within the community as well, and then moving them into action and moving them into becoming leaders. And the leaders from Toys R Us, they have done amazing things, from sitting at the table with elected officials to introduce federal legislation, to becoming just like public leaders and experts on the role of Wall Street in retail. So we'll talk more about what the leadership looks like, but let's, next slide, please. So one of the things that we have, when we think about the importance of Facebook and the role of groups, we utilize different kinds of Facebook groups in our model, right? So we have public facing pages, right? And then we have public groups as well as private groups. You can organize your your spaces into, you know, a lot of these different forms of groups, right? And in order to just create smaller communities. One of the things that has been really valuable to us has been, you know, creating targeted spaces where people who are connected through particular, you know, regionally connected to a particular issue around whether they're, you know, women dealing with women's empowerment issues or dealing with things like sexual harassment in the workplace, that you can have issue specific groups. You can create private groups that is open only to, let's say, certain like constituency groups, right? We've had groups for our LGBTQ folks and leaders, right? But the idea is that this sort of dynamic interplay between different kinds of groups, it's essentially to create community and not just to dump everyone into one form of group, one form of, you know, Facebook group or Facebook space and say this is be all and end all of it, but it's always about how do we target groups of people. So even beyond Facebook groups, we'll also create you know, Facebook message threads where that'll be the primary mode of communication for small committees, right? So the idea, as always, is to connect with folks in these targeted ways, and to use the Facebook functionality to the extent that it does support us. But we also are meeting, you know, over Zoom. We're also using other tools to connect with communities. Anything else you wanted to add, Aneta? No. All right.
Yeah, I think just the one piece on this is all of this, you know, and when we do this presentation, all of this that we're talking about, right, the online to offline organizing, this is in service of eventually moving people off of groups, right? So the goal here isn't to build the biggest possible list or to build the biggest possible group, right? This is not about vanity metrics and big numbers. It's really about what the goals of the campaign are. And most of the time that means offline action. And offline action, yes, could mean mass protests, but especially in the era of COVID, right, it could mean picking up the phone, right, and calling elected leaders, right, or doing other things that aren't just within the online space. And so the goal as we're building our list and as we're building these spaces is always offline action.
Absolutely. The other thing just to point out is that, you know, especially for where we are organizing, which is retail workers are sort of online, they are present online and in a way organizing with or without us. The example here is of a group called the Dead Giraffe Society, which was basically an employer group for, Toys R Us employees. It was started by employees, current and former employees, once Toys R Us's bankruptcy was announced, and they called it Dead Giraffe Society in reference to their mascot. So the space that this, you know, it had over, as you can see, 15,000 members. At its height, it had closer to, you know, 20,000 folks. And, you know, the space, what was just, you know, happening in this space wasn't just, you know, talking about the workplace or talking about nostalgia or talking about how much they love their jobs, which was absolutely happening. But there were also some folks that were starting to talk about, I'm really angry about losing my job. I'm really angry that I'm losing my severance. And you know, I'm really angry that I'm losing my financial stability. And I'm angry at these private equity firms, right? So there was a very diverse set of conversations already happening, which is fertile ground for organizing.
Great. And as you can see here, the membership, this group had 15,000 members out of a workforce of 30,000 members. So this became our really like the place where we were doing a lot of our initial conversations because so many people were already here. And then just a quick note in particular about Facebook groups as opposed to Facebook pages. So you all may remember this after the last election, Facebook really reprioritized the groups in the algorithm. And so there became this really big push to get people to engage more deeply with family and friends. Facebook kept talking about what they called meaningful interactions, which was happening in a lot of the group spaces. So just to give you kind of like a sense of this shift, 2 years ago, there was about 100 million people that were members of, quote, meaningful Facebook groups. And now that number is about 400 million. And some of you all may remember, even during the Super Bowl last year, Facebook spent about $10 million on an ad specifically asking people to join Facebook groups. And so what we see, right, in this shift is all of a sudden, groups became really, really central and really important for kind of two reasons, right? One is, as organizers and as an organization, our content was able to be seen by more people, right? Because it was prioritizing algorithm, it was coming up higher on the news feed, and that was really, really important for our content to be seen. And the second piece is really the ability to form peer-to-peer relationships. And so if you think of a Facebook page, right, a lot of the interaction is person to organization. Yes, there are, comment threads and some people are commenting with each other, but it's not really about the like deeper relationship building in the same way that groups have allowed us to really, as organizers, kind of curate and create that space and empower folks. And then the relationships happen within that space and folks end up becoming friends with each other and befriending each other and moving conversations to messenger threads and really deeply engaging in a way that we haven't seen on pages. And so a lot of this shift has really, really impacted the way that we organize over the last couple of years, specifically in Facebook groups. And so the next series of slides, I'm just going to take you all through an example conversation from this group that Alia was just talking about, the Dead Giraffe Society. We would use the search functionality. And so every group has kind of a search feature where you can see what people are talking about. And so in the early stages of the campaign, we were using the search feature to look up terms like, executive bonuses or, corporate greed, right? And seeing who was already talking and thinking about this bankruptcy in the framework of, the billionaires and Wall Street is responsible for this. Once we would find those people, it was really like us as organizers on our personal profiles would then message folks who were commenting in these spaces and start having one-on-one conversations. So I'm going to take you through an example of what a potential one-on-one conversation could look like after identifying somebody in some of these spaces on Facebook. So this is an example of this woman, Amanda, who I found in Dead Giraffe Society, and she made a post about executive bonuses. So I sent her a message. This is cold outreach from me, Aneta Molenda, my personal profile, not United for Respect. And I just sent her a DM on Messenger. Hey, Amanda, I saw your comments in Dead Giraffe Society. It's absolutely ridiculous that the execs are walking away with millions and bonuses are measly or non-existent. Ugh, how long have you worked at True? She said, going on 4 years. I said, wow, you must be heartbroken. How is the store closure affecting you and your family? You hanging in? So a couple of things about this. In the first message, and we've learned this over many years of kind of perfecting this cold outreach. One is I'm not introducing myself as a staff organizer, right? I'm not saying, hi, like I'm with this organization and this is my job title and this is the campaign that we're running, right? I'm just like a regular human having a regular conversation with somebody until we take it to the next level. So you don't want to send like a 4-paragraph, intro message because you're not going to get a response. The second thing is be relational, like be real in the way that you talk to your, friends and other folks around, using emojis, using shortcuts. True, TRU was the acronym that they were using to refer to the employer. And so it's really, really important to start to like really just build a relationship and not overly professionalize the interaction. And if, and she responds, and then, my question, how is this affecting you and your family? Are you hanging in? This became a really important kind of first question, right? We don't want to jump too quickly. And this is, organizing 101, right? We don't want to jump too quickly into like fishing for issues before we like really kind of develop deep relationships and give people space to grieve and to like really empathize with what they're going through. So she responds, it's rough. This was my career. I'm 32 years old, a single mom, living at home with my parents. Literally just got back on my feet when this happened. Reminding you, this is her second ever message to me, and I'm a stranger on the internet, and she's already sharing so much of her story because there is this need to connect. And then she asks, how are you? And I said, oh my gosh, that's so tough, especially being a single mom. Sending you my love, dear. She says, thanks, love. I appreciate you reaching out. We're calling each other love in our like first ever conversation on Messenger. Like this is the power of just like the basic need that we have as humans to connect with each other and be real and not be robots and professional. And that became really, really important in a lot of the early reach outs. So after we have, an initial conversation, then, I say like, actually, I'm talking to a lot of Toys R Us workers, and it, and we have this Facebook group that we started where we're specifically organizing around severance pay, right? Making sure that like you get what you deserve. And so as we move from Facebook Messenger, we add these people first as Facebook friends, right? So all of a sudden now I'm friends with these folks, then add them to this Facebook group that we started. And immediately when we add folks to this Facebook group, we do what we call a welcome post. And these posts get a lot of engagement. So I said, everybody, please welcome Amanda. She's from Texas, worked at Toys R Us 4 years. And everybody in this group is now so used to seeing these welcome posts that folks start jumping in and start welcoming, right, and sending hearts. And it's just a really nice way of like really creating that community. But it's important not to leave it at this, right? You can't just dump people into a Facebook group and expect the magic will happen and they will organize and they will, self create spaces and relationships. We have to keep the conversation going. So I went back to Messenger and we kept talking. And she told me that, it's, all she wants is her freaking vacation time pay now. I earned that last year. She was losing all of her vacation days. And I said, that's totally unfair. In California, they have better laws. Texas, not so lucky. And she said, yeah, I wish we could do something to shake the system up, but I'm only one person, As an organizer, like this is gold mine, right? To have somebody say this. And so I respond, yes, but if one person each gets one more person, then we build a movement. She goes, very true. Should we start by emailing our congressmen or state representatives, right? This is her idea. And so I spent the next hour working on her story and building out her story that she could be, could send to her legislators. And then one thing that I noticed on the welcome post, immediately once we added her to the group, she tagged this person named Nicole. And so I asked her, I'm like, who's Nicole? She told me Nicole is her best friend. They work together. And I'm like, great, we should get Nicole involved in the campaign as well. So Amanda tells me Nicole doesn't really want to be a part of it. LOL. She's kind of scared. And I said, scared of what? She's already losing her job and getting screwed. What are they going to do? Fire her? LOL. The important piece here is this became a really important talking point in the case of organizing in bankruptcy because everybody was being fired. I would never, ever, ever recommend being this callous if you're a union organizer and like people, like there is an actual, a threat of like people losing their jobs. But in our case, because everybody was being fired anyway, it became a really important talking point. She goes, LOL, exactly. I need to ask, by doing any of this, can they deny my unemployment benefits? So then we started talking about protected concerted activity, right, and what it means to engage in collective action. And as we're continuing to develop, this relationship one-on-one between me and Amanda, I end up coaching her, right, to bring Nicole into the group. And so now when she brought in her best friend, her coworker, Nicole into the group, it's not my job to post a welcome message about Nicole. Right now, I'm trying to have Amanda see herself as an organizer, right? And so then Amanda does a welcome post for Nicole, and everybody, similar situation, everybody like jumps in, welcomes Nicole. Within a few hours, you see on the right, I also asked her to post the letter that I helped her write to email to her members of Congress. And the first comment that she puts is who pledges to follow suit in their state, right, around writing a letter to their legislators. We had Shelly Jackson, which was a Toys R Us worker in Florida, comment me. Okay, you're a pop quiz, you're an organizer, drop in the chat, what would you do in this moment, right? Amanda's very excited. She just posted this letter that she sent to her legislators. She's asked who pledges to follow suit in their state. And now we have another Toys R Us worker commenting me. Got lots of engage, recruit. Yes. The gut reaction, right, as an organizer is, oh my God, Shelly, like now let me message Shelly and help her write a letter. But actually, leadership development, right, tells us that, okay, let me take a step back. Let me reach out to Amanda and coach Amanda to reach out to Shelly to help Shelly write a letter, right? So then Amanda starts really, really seeing herself as an organizer herself, right? And as somebody who can coach people. And she just did this thing, right? And she can help people craft their own stories. And so that's really how we get to much bigger scale, because the workers are themselves connecting with folks all across the country and doing that organizing work. And then within a couple of weeks, these are two photos of Amanda drove 5 or 6 hours to a pension fund meeting where she testified to a pension fund about what it was like to lose her job and why the Texas union that was investing in the teachers retirement fund shouldn't invest in Bain Capital and KKR, who was bankrupting and costing working class jobs. She did this in-person testimony without ever having met a staff person in real life. And the person next to her, this is another worker who became a really, really incredible leader, also from Texas. Her name is MJ. She was from Waco. And we connected them to each other on Facebook. So they drove to this meeting together, met for the first time in person, testified with no staff present. And so this is just one example of a worker, right, Amanda, who went through this process, but every single person who we brought in through the campaign, we met in this way. So here you have, this is an action that we did in New York City. You have Cheryl from New Jersey here on the left, Michelle from Oregon. We have all of these folks. We met all these people on Facebook Messenger and brought them into the group and then started organizing. Here's another example. This is Romeric from California. He came out to an action with his kids, met him on Facebook. This is Madeline Garcia. She became a really, really incredible leader in Florida and single-handedly organized several actions where she got 100% participation in her store. Again, met her in a Facebook group. And the power of really kind of Facebook, right, and like connecting people to each other is by the end, the last week of the Toys R Us stores being open, and this was in the last week of June in 2018, we put out a call to action to all of these leaders to organize distributed actions all across the country for the last week that their stores were open. And so we had incredible actions in stores all across the country. Here on the left, we have, this is Madeline Garcia's store in Florida. On the right, this is the Toys R Us in the Bronx in New York. We had another store in Arizona here on the left, and then Cheryl's store on the right in New Jersey. All of these folks started organizing actions, and all we did was connect folks to each other, create the resources, create the space, empower folks, create the toolkit of what they needed to organize an action. And every single one of these actions was organized with no staff on the ground. And passing it back to you, Alia, to talk about the national online organizing infrastructure.
Great, thanks so much. And there were some really great questions popping up, so I really appreciate y'all for those. And I'm gonna hopefully address some of the questions in some detail, but to the question of, you know, how do you connect with folks online, right? Like as Annetta is talking about, when you are already in employer specific, if not employer specific, but these loosely employer specific groups, and then moving them into national and regional Facebook groups, it doesn't end there. That's sort of the beginning of the engagement. We're really building an organizing infrastructure here where one-on-ones that are conducted over the phone, over Zoom, are critical, where you're staying in touch with folks over text, over Facebook message. The initial one-on-ones that we're having with folks are deep sort of story collection and really more holistic in their approach. It's about really connecting with folks as people. And I have had numerous experiences down the road with folks who become active with us and said, you know, I felt heard for the first time. I felt like I was talking to someone who was being empathetic and really connecting with me and asking me how I was doing. A lot of folks, I should say, who are going through retail, you know, Wall Street driven bankruptcy are also experiencing depression and are experiencing, you know, a huge sort of change in their life. It's a huge, you know, sort of watershed moment, right? It's deeply traumatic for a lot of folks. And so having these one-on-ones over the phone, creating, you know, with an organizer, also connecting with folks over messenger threads where we, you know, after conducting the one-on-ones, we are putting groups of folks together in service of forming, you know, worker committees. and then meeting regularly over Zoom, we formed a national committee of Toys R Us workers. We formed a national committee of Sears workers. At the beginning of 2019, we sort of banded those groups together and formed a multi-employer national retail committee. As we continue to do new organizing on the Wall Street team, and so I have a committee of current employee, of a current campaign of folks who have gone through retail bankruptcy during COVID, right? So we create both employer specific spaces so that people connect with their own sort of coworkers, and then we also bring them into a broader committee space where they can connect with folks across retail who have experienced what they've gone through. And now our national committee has half a dozen different retailers that have gone bankrupt. So we have Sears and Kmart and Shopko, Payless, and these are all folks that are connecting not just as the experience they went through in their specific employer, but as retail workers who are going through, who've been dealt with Wall Street greed, who've had their jobs destroyed by Wall Street greed, right? Netta, if you can move on to the next slide, right? So the organizing pathway it's sort of self-reinforcing, right? We are connecting people online. We're first connecting ourselves into and plugging into online communities that already exist, and then bringing them into our United for Respect spaces. The key sort of motivation here, it's really supporting and making people feel loved and supported, right? This is why we say our online to offline model is really more like online to offline to online, right? It continues. It's not a linear pathway. The pathway is, self-reinforcing because it really is about connecting workers to each other and forming a sense of community. And so this is just a moment now, while we're in the COVID moment, one thing that we've done is that, once we have these online community spaces, these are dynamic spaces. So when we were all locked down, we were in quarantine, our leaders were coming to our weekly Thursday night calls because they needed a place to just come and talk about how difficult it's been and what they're going through in their lives and how scared they are. It was just a community building space. It was a space that people rely on and need because they were feeling isolated, they were feeling alone. And these are, connecting with people across the country who they've been in the struggle together with for the last year or 2 years. It's a meaningful space to them. And so this was certainly the case for this is the broader community space. So this is what we mean by self-reinforcing. It's always about, building community. It's about connecting to people's issues, but also to who they are as human beings, right? Which is also why people don't, it helps to build trust. And even earlier on, right, I got a question about, do people feel misled? Overall, my experience has been no, because we lead with asking people how they are. The first question Zanetta is asking Amanda is how are you doing? How are you handling this horrible moment, right? It's a question that a lot of folks aren't even asked, right? So because we lead with empathy, we lead with sort of building a relationship, that is what people react and respond to, and so of course we deal with negativity, of course we deal with detractors, we absolutely deal with people who don't believe in our values. And, but I have found my experience is that even when people ask so you're not an employer, so you're not an employee at my same company, where are you? It is very clear. We say, this is who we are. United for Respect is a worker-led organization. We are working, to support retail workers, especially folks like you, going through retail, Wall Street driven bankruptcy, and people understand what that is and they're grateful, right? And of the people who are opposed, they're opposed. And the people who want to drop off, they can drop off. But it does not, people don't necessarily feel misled because they remember what we led with, which was the empathy. Anyway, yeah, thanks. And so we also have, these are great examples of, sort of members are leading, right? And what does that look like? So these are just two examples, right? We have leaders who are identifying new campaign opportunities. So this first post is just, one of our core leaders, Liz, who, has, through her advocacy around activism around, Wall Street greed and its role in retail, has now looked at the role of private equity firms in, buying like pipelines and their sort of role in, the environmental, and sort of getting connected to environmental justice movements and looking at the connections between Wall Street and, fossil fuels and things like that. So like, they're identifying connections in the broader world around us. We also have leaders, members are leading the organizing by supporting new members, right? In January of 2019, we did our first sort of gathering of Toys R Us and Sears and Kmart workers, where Toys R Us employees were training Sears employees on how do you fight for severance? How do you fight for holding Wall Street accountable? And that has been a critical part of our work, that as we've grown our spaces, it's been really about like, having the folks who have led campaigns and been the faces of campaigns really being the face of, explaining to folks and drawing in our new members as well. So.
Great. And so just to kind of give you all a sense of the scale of the organizing. So by the end of the campaign, we were able to organize 72 total actions like offline, right? And so this included 26 meetings with elected officials, 28 direct actions. So 6 of these were with staff. So some of the like bigger kind of marches, we did a march on Wall Street where we did like a funeral procession with Jeffrey the Giraffe, which was the mascot, and then 22 direct actions without any staff support. And then workers testified at about 18 pension fund meetings. So kind of seeing these numbers, I always ask this, and unfortunately everybody's on mute, but how many full-time organizers do you think we pulled this off with, right? This campaign that lasted from like the moment that we started to the moment we won, it's probably around like 8-9 months. If you have any guesses in the chat, drop them in the chat. I'm super curious what you all think in terms of like the scale of our like organizing team. All right, folks are guessing 3, folks are guessing 8, more 3s, 4. Yeah, so all of this work we did with one full-time organizer, right? And so in the beginning of the campaign, it was really, there was like 2 of us like dedicating like a couple hours a week to like really like developing the campaign before we ended up hiring Alia. And really for the bulk of the campaign, Alia was the only organizer assigned to this campaign. And so this is a testament to just how incredible a really tight online to offline organizing pathway is, where you're empowering folks to be leaders, to develop their own relationships, to really do distributed and scaled organizing, so that the organizer doesn't have to have their hands in every single pot and have to support every single thing, but really your job is to empower folks. And my argument would be that Facebook groups allows those peer-to-peer relationships to form in a very, very deep way, in a way that if you were organizing on a national campaign and only had a page that was run by comm staff, right, it doesn't allow for those like deep one-on-one and peer-to-peer relationships that folks are having with each other. And so it's really important for us that the Facebook groups were being run by organizers, right? And I think this trips up a lot of folks who maybe think of as like digital as comms, right? And as a comms strategy. And comms is really important, and really, really happy that, that work is being done. But when we reframe to think about digital as organizing and not just as comms, and really have organizers, the ones who are leading the content strategy, right? The engagement in the groups, all of the pieces that are required to build those peer-to-peer relationships, then it becomes much stronger, and we're able to drive down a lot of the work that maybe an organizer typically might hold in a campaign to a set of incredible leaders that become essentially an organizing team.
Okay, so I was looking at some of the questions. So, all right, let's talk about victories. We won, with Toys R Us. We won a $20 million fund from the private equity firms Bain Capital and KKR, who, just saddled Toys R Us with debt and led it into bankruptcy, destroyed all these jobs. It was the first time private equity firms have contributed funds towards compensating employees. They oftentimes play the "we are not the employer" card. And so this was a great moment to kind of call them on that. And it set a precedent for our models for future organizing. We've subsequently also gotten a modest fund for employees at a regional furniture retailer called Art Van Furniture. I don't know if anyone here is from the Michigan area, but they also went through bankruptcy during COVID. And we employed a similar model to kind of, organize workers, connect with folks, connect with their stories, and really push the private equity firm Thomas H. Lee Partners to create a small fund as well. So we know this is possible, but there's also broader, like longer term structural change that's needed. It's not just about like fighting for like funds. It's also about like changing the laws that allow these types of buyouts to happen. So we've also introduced the Stop Wall Street Looting Act in Congress last July with Senator Elizabeth Warren, with Bernie Sanders, with also Rashida Tlaib. Anyways, we have these amazing rock stars, out in Congress who, are like supporting our sort of call to action to hold Wall Street companies accountable. And this is going to become that much more relevant as we go through the COVID pandemic, as we are seeing, unemployment, skyrocketing. The issues that the Stop Wall Street Looting Act raises is things like, protections for laid off workers. We have much more to talk about around like getting more protection for laid off workers, regardless of Wall Street ownership or not. And so mandatory severance laws, we're looking into that at state levels. We've introduced one in New Jersey, which is facing some issues. We're definitely, facing some challenges there, but Michigan is thinking of introducing a mandatory severance law as well. And, so there is both the immediacy of like trying to meet people and address some of their, immediate concerns with like, I lost my health insurance. I want, to be compensated. I lost my severance. And, there's also the longer term structural change. And so we're trying to manage both of those. And I can say that we have, now Wall Street experts who are from the retail, industry who are doing both, which is really incredible. And, speaking of outcomes, right, like we've talked a little bit about some of our more holistic approach to organizing. It's not just, we're going to talk about this one particular issue, which is you lost your health insurance or you lost your severance, but we do this more holistic, which is, it's harder, right? But you get to know people's like stories and who they really are as people. And when you connect with them on their values, what you do is you really get to, really connect with people on a much more substantive level, right? And so one of the outcomes has been that the leaders that we've developed, the leaders that I've been working with for 2 years, are now, deeply committed activists for long-term change. So some of our leaders, for example, in this first, the HuffPost headline, during the sort of height of the Toys R Us campaign, our leaders were being asked to weigh in on not just their personal stories and on, and on Toys R Us, but they were being asked to weigh in on questions about like the presidential elections, right? Deval Patrick was sort of, he had nothing to do with the Toys R Us bankruptcy. He wasn't at Bain Capital when it happened. But here, in this particular article, one of our leaders was asked, well, what do you think about the fact that a former head of, of private equity is running for, is running for office, is trying to be the, Democratic nominee? What is your position? What do you think we need to see? How do we hold folks like those accountable, right? So our leaders are shaping national conversations, and reporters are like, are seeing those connections. And secondly, leaders are growing our movement, right? They are advocating for newly impacted retail workers. Just this week, leaders from our, small group of leaders signed on to a letter, urging a bankruptcy judge who is overseeing the bankruptcy process for JCPenney to really reconsider the fact that, one of the bids is coming from Sycamore Partners, which is a private equity entity, a private equity firm. And built into their sort of bid to take over JCPenney is they're getting rid of tons and tons of jobs, right? So our leaders are inserting themselves into these conversations early on. And we're trying to do that more preemptively as we continue to grow the program.
Amazing. Thank you, Alia. So that kind of wraps up the kind of formal presentation. Folks had a lot of juicy questions. We have about 15 minutes to talk more deeply and engage in questions. The two things that I did want to mention, somebody asked this earlier, that was a really great question around Facebook friends. And does this mean that we have to, quote, sacrifice our Facebook profiles for our organizing because we're building all these friendships with folks who may be strangers to us and who are often strangers to us. To that, I will say a couple of things. Like, one is it's just so response rates go through the roof once you start engaging with people as a person and not as an organization, right? Like, people just want to connect with people and not with an entity, right? Then it feels like really formal and professional, and like they're gonna be recorded, or the people have a lot of kind of like fears around that. And so engaging with people as people is really, really important, which is one of the reasons why we use our personal Facebook profiles a lot. Facebook does allow you to have security settings that essentially you could like put folks who may not be your like real tight friends and family into a different category with different permissions around like seeing your posts. But one of the things that's really helpful is it's actually like as you're building a relationship with folks you're organizing with, sometimes it is really nice for them to like see a photo of like your dog being silly on your timeline, right? And like humanize you, that you're not just this like robot organizer, but you're like an actual like whole ass human being. And then the second bonus piece of this, and this is important in terms of the Facebook algorithm, is in Facebook groups, one thing that happens really quickly as an organizer is if you are a person in a group that has a lot of friends in that group, your posts are more likely to be prioritized. So for example, if we have a group of 5,000 folks and I'm friends with 500 of them, and somebody else is friends with 5 of them, even if we post the same exact thing in that Facebook group, my post is much more likely to be to go to the top of people's timelines, to be seen by the people that I'm friends with and their friends, right? And so it's exponentially, you start to see as you're building these Facebook groups in these spaces, it becomes really, really, really important to be friends with people and get your content seen. That becomes a really, really, really big key. The second piece, just on the Facebook groups algorithm, is when you are posting, right? One of the things that we try to do in Facebook groups is try to be as relational as possible, right? So like somebody, for example, asked a really great question about reporters. So for instance, I would never recommend to say, hey everyone, a New York Times reporter just reached out. They're doing a story about sexual harassment at Walmart. Like, does anybody have experience with this? Let me know, DM me. You're gonna get very few, if any, responses to that. But instead, if you reframe the question, right, and you're like, hey y'all, has anybody dealt with harassment in your stores? How do you do it? All of a sudden that starts a conversation where people are like really engaging with each other, and they're like, yeah, oh my God, I had this really awful manager 6 years ago. Like, let me tell you all about this. And at that point, right, once people like start to like really relationally co-create those community resources, then you can DM them on the side and be like, oh my God, your story was so powerful. I'm so sorry you went through that. By the way, there's this New York Times reporter that's writing a story about this. Do you mind if I connect you? Right? And so that you're not leading with that, you're creating the space to create the relational community pieces, and then plugging folks into those that like reframed ask. And similarly, the most successful and effective posts, and this goes both on Facebook pages that we see, right, is like memes and things that are funny, people that relate to use a lot of memes. And then in particular in Facebook groups, I see a lot of green organizers in particular. Like, let's say you're in this like Giraffe Society group, right? There's 15,000 people, and you're specifically, and there's an action coming up in Miami. You're specifically looking to connect with folks in Miami. It's not effective to make a post and say, hey, is anybody in this group? Does anybody in this group live in Miami? I'm looking for people in store number like 5306. Like, let me know if you work in that store. right? Because really quickly, the Facebook algorithm learns that people who see that post are going to keep scrolling past it, because very likely there's very few people who work at that specific store or in that specific city. Instead, reframing that to be roll call, what city and state are you in? Drop your store number in the comments section. All of a sudden, we see those posts get 400 comments, because every single person scrolling by will drop in a comment, and the comments will then mean that that post is more likely to be seen by more people. So what ends up happening is, as you're creating content, think about, how do I make this content the most relevant to as many people as possible to really get the boost in the algorithm to be seen by more people. And then if you truly are looking for people who live in Miami, then scroll through the comments and find the people who live in Miami, rather than kind of filtering it on the front end. And so there's like a little bit of kind of like reframing that is really, really helpful in terms of getting our content seen much more effectively. So looking at what are other questions that are open?
There was a question around, yeah, like the difference between, speaking to folks in the comment sections in groups, or that, people sometimes speak collectively in the comments. How does reaching out work here? I mean, is that a question more about, like, one of the things that's really important is doing both the public commenting and then following up privately, more generally, right? So engaging, especially in our, whether it's in our United for Respect run group, or whether it's in these other spaces that we're not moderating, but we're in, like the Dead Giraffe Society, which was an open group. Or I think it was an open group for a while, and then I think they closed it. It's important to engage publicly, right, on posts, and to just, again, use the same principles of organizing around, just connecting with folks and their issues, and then to move them into private conversations. And so it's that interplay between public and sort of one-on-one outreach. Our goal as organizers, right, with new folks, is to connect one-on-one, and then connect them back into a broader community, right? Like, it's, you engage with folks publicly, you bring them in one-on-one, and then you kind of sustain their engagement by connecting them through broader, other communities of folks that, are going through similar things. And there are also some questions around, like, how do we, like, deal with folks who are not active on Facebook? I mean, is absolutely true, as we, continue doing our work, that Facebook is still being, I mean, it's certainly, I don't know I'm sure there are folks here who know the data around it, but it's still being used by, a lot of folks, but especially with ads targeting and stuff like that, that there is, some of our base does skew a little bit older. And I think it's just about meeting folks where they're at, right? Like, my coworker is experimenting with Reddit. Like, we are always open to, like, thinking about new places to find folks. And, we will experiment with different spaces. We don't try to, force people to use Facebook if they're not active on it, but we meet them where they're at. So we'll form a text thread, or we'll form a WhatsApp thread, or we'll connect with folks over email, or, whatever it is. We try to connect with folks using the sort of tools that they're already using. So yeah, I think that's also a critical piece. And I think that can help with spaces that are maybe not as lively. Or if your people are not using Facebook groups, what are they using? If they're not active on Facebook, are they active somewhere else? And ultimately, like, for committee calls, like, we don't use Facebook groups. We run, we use Zoom, we're doing regular Zoom calls, right? So I think connecting with folks, like, one-on-one and in small group spaces, is also critical just to organizing in general. And, yeah, if your people are sort of boycotting Facebook, if they're not using Facebook, if they're young and they think it's not for me, we're not forcing them, we're not going to insist that they do so, but they can still join committee calls on Zoom, and then we'll just follow up with them separately. So I think that was some of the questions.
Yeah, one question that I want to lift up, somebody asked, because we're using our personal profiles to be friends with these folks, like, what do we do at the end of a campaign? Do we delete those folks? And I think this is really, really key to a lot of the organizing that we do at United for Respect, which is, after we won this Toys R Us campaign, right? So we ran this campaign, these folks won $20 million in severance pay, like, checks in the mail, severance pay. And at the end of it, they don't leave and walk away and say, cool, we won that, like now that's done. We just spent the last year like training these folks to be incredible organizers and leaders and pivot them to other campaigns. And folks are really, really excited about this. So for example, when like Sears and Kmart were going to bankruptcy, Alia posted the screenshot earlier of this press piece that Toys R Us workers would get in their cars and drive to their local Sears and be like, I just went through this. There's this organization, right? Let's organize like this, talk to your coworkers. Like these are all the options that you have. And so really like the goal here isn't just to kind of like do a campaign, win a campaign and move on, but to like really keep these people engaged. And one of the things that we keep hearing over and over again, we actually did a survey a couple of years ago around why do you stay involved in the organization? And this is in particular, we were talking to Walmart workers at the time. And we find that a lot of former employees end up staying with the organization for many years. And so we're like, why do you stay? And the predominant answer, and you know, this might sound corny, but it's so real, right? Is like love. And they feel like they found a family. We heard this all of the time from Toys R Us workers where they kept saying that like, you know, we're losing one family, right? Because the company existed for 70 years and everybody was getting laid off, but they gained another family, which is this like really deep movement. And I don't think that would have been possible if we were just creating relationships between organizer and worker. And the only way that like sense of family is really possible if we're co-creating the community together and creating that space for those peer-to-peer relationships and really building out power. You know, Linda said it really well in the chat, building power for the long haul. I think that's exactly right. Yeah, there's a lot of questions around alternative platforms boycotting Facebook. I think this is super real. Mm-hmm. And I'm of the mind, and we also, you know, spend money on Facebook ads to build our list and follow up with folks. And I'm of the mind that it's like it's where people are. It's the most used social media platform and the best one to connect with folks and co-create those spaces. And is it problematic? Yes. Is there an alternative right now at that scale? No. And so until there is, right, even, you know, thinking about other social media platforms that like maybe folks aren't on, I would rather organize people where they already are very active and are going multiple times a day and are connecting with their friends and family than organizing them to join a new thing, to start logging in multiple times a day on the new thing and then organize them in the campaign, right? That like adds so many layers. But like Alia was saying, that there's so many people who aren't on Facebook. And so I think like Reddit is a really, really great place to kind of keep your finger on the pulse around like what folks are talking about depending on the campaign that you're in. But it's also much more anonymous, right? Like you could probably imagine it's different on Facebook where people are using their real names and you can DM them and build a real relationship versus DMing somebody on Reddit who may not, you know, who may be more anonymous. Yeah, and then of course, you know, I see Jeremy posted about TikTok. That's been really fascinating to see a lot of that work being done on TikTok as well, and like all the incredible examples from the Trump campaign and the TikTok teams organizing to take down the Tulsa rally.
Totally. Yeah, and I mean, just to say that like, as we keep growing our organizing, I mean, we're always experimenting, you know, with the online to offline model, right? I mean, we're seeing what it looks like to, you know, extend to Reddit and how we have to modify our approach or how there are different sets of questions that emerge, right, from it being anonymous. A coworker of mine successfully did identify a couple of folks on Reddit for a PetSmart campaign that she's working on, right? But it looked a little different. The process was a little different. Absolutely, when it skews male, the approach is a little bit different. So I think that like, yeah, there's a lot of like experimenting going on. We on our Wall Street team, Wall Street accountability team, we're like really fond or excited to experiment and try out, you know, different, you know, platforms, and to see what works and what doesn't work. And it's just constantly, you know, just trying new things. So for sure. Yeah.
Great. And so it looks like we only have 1 minute left. So just really wanted to thank everybody for joining us for the session. If you have any questions, you have our Twitters for both Alia and myself, and then our email addresses. We love to share our knowledge and learn what you all are doing at your organizations. And so please reach out. We're here to make all of our movements stronger.
Thank you so much. This was really fun. Really appreciate all of you so much.